Hello, MJ, and welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm good, Avish. How are you?
I'm doing great. Well, this is exciting. We have known each other for a number of years, and it's been a long time since we've connected. So I'm excited to catch up and chat and share with people listening what you've been up to. Uh,
I am excited to catch up with you too. I've learned so much about humor from you. So hopefully today I can show off some skills.
all right, I appreciate that. So I've known you for a while, but there's people listening who don't. So to start things off, could you just give us like the sort of 1 minute bio of who you are and what you do?
Sure. So my name is MJ Shaar. I have been in the wellness industry for about 20 some years now. I have a strong background in positive psychology. And now I am pivoting towards team building and personal wellness. So right at the junction where these two things meet. And I focus on kindness nowadays. So this is what I do.
Okay, and that's an interesting place to start. So you did wellness, and now you're talking about kindness, and this is one of the things when one of the reasons I reached out to you to be on the podcast because I've been seeing you post a lot on LinkedIn about kindness and
Yes.
all of your messages. Everyone I saw, I'm like, oh well, that sounds kind of similar from a different angle to what I'm doing with Yes and. So let's first talk about from a high level. When you say I talk about kindness or I'm a kindness speaker, for some people they get it, but others might be a little confused. So when you say I'm a kindness speaker, what does that mean?
Right. And it's funny because the people who need it the most are the ones who are most resistant to the idea of kindness.
Yeah, isn't that always
So,
the case?
right. So, depending on the audience, I might say kindness, or I might call it more compassion, or I might call it more belonging at work, or something like that. We might have to change the word. It could be collaboration, cohesion. So, all of those themes are encompassed. The French in me wants to come out. How do you say it exactly? Regardless of how you pronounce it, right? Um, the idea is, are you spreading joy and are you spreading peace around you? And what happens when you do? And a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people are thinking, in the workplace, like this has
Yeah.
nothing to do with work, but quite the contrary, as you know, Avish, right? It has
Mm-hmm.
everything to do with how we collaborate with each other, how willing we are to support one another, and the quality of the outcomes that we produce together.
Yeah, and I'd like to dig in a moment to like how that might apply to work, but also people listening, it's not necessarily for professionals, so we can talk about personal life as well. But before,
Sure.
how did you come across this topic of kindness? Because as you said, and when we first met, you were uh, a wellness speaker, and you have a book called Smarts and Stamina, which we can talk about
Yes.
in a little bit as well. But then, how and why did you now transition into being a kindness speaker?
Yes, good question. Thank you for asking it. It's going to be the first time that I actually explain it formally. So let's see how I
Oh
do.
wow.
Um, so I used to have a model explaining how we can improve our sleep, food, mood, and exercise habits in conjunction. And at the time, I would have people who would say, well, MJ, I've tried everything in the book and I still can't sleep at night. Or MJ, I have tried everything, but I still have those food cravings. And so I was on the quest for like, what's the most impactful thing people can do that will be the easiest way to get them to their goal. And my
Mm-hmm.
first thought was, well, in sleep, food, mood, and exercise, well, so first of all, the four are very interrelated. Any change you make in these four groups of habits will change your biochemical activity, and that will make future healthy behaviors either more or less likely. So I was like, how do we get them to success? And my first thought was, let's not start where it's the hardest. Let's start where it's the easiest. That way, they can create momentum, recalibrate that biochemical activity, build on initial victories, build their self confidence, and get to the goal. But then I realized people don't have time. So they don't sleep. So they don't exercise. So they don't cook.
Mm-hmm.
People feel defeated. They've tried before. It hasn't worked. Right. And over time, I realized, well, they have all of these excuses or challenges when it comes to their sleep, their food, and their exercise habits. The low hanging fruit seems to be mood for most people.
Mm-hmm.
Now, within mood, there's a lot that you can do. You can uplift your spirits. You can try to repress or not repress, like trying to put under the carpet, but more as in find ways to become more resilient so that the negative emotions don't affect you quite so heavily or so long. There's a lot that you can do within that. But what research has found that is the easiest and simplest and most lasting way to boost your own mood is through kindness. So if
Hmm.
we start with kindness, eventually we can get to these other goals of sleeping a little bit better at night, of chasing away those crazy food cravings that usually, pester us at night when we're trying to
Uh-huh.
watch the news and these sorts of things. So this is how I decided to blow up kindness. I feel like it's the easiest entry point to personal wellness. And I feel like the ripple effects on the rest of our lives at work and at home are just so valuable that it needs to be discussed more often and more deeply.
Wow, that's fascinating. And it's like the initial thought, my kind of little yes but that pops up, but it's more just a clarification from you, is that I agree. Well, I would agree that changing the mood and being kind is like the simplest change to make. I, do you find, or I might find for a lot of people, it's it would almost be the hardest because it's almost like just telling someone, hey, eat less sugar. They can kind of be like, all right, I'll just not eat dessert tonight. But telling someone be kinder, it's almost like this, like they have to change their rewiring their brain, which is probably the benefit. But it feels like it almost be, I don't know if people like, do you find people have trouble wrapping their mind around like, well, be kinder, like, well, I can't be kind when someone's mean to me, or well, it's not my fault. Like, how do you kind of deal with people who resist being kind?
Yeah. Well, so the first thing is a lot of people don't know what their values are. They
Mm-hmm.
don't take the time to really identify what are my top values in life? What do I value most? Right.
Mm-hmm.
But when we find the time to do that and we have identified these are the things that I feel have the most intrinsic value in my life, then typically, just for having done that, we tend to align our behaviors in a way that is more attuned to other people's needs. So therefore, we
Mm.
become a little bit less self-centered. And when we know what our values are and we align our behaviors in relation to that, we tend to boost our self confidence. It's like there's a sense of harmony in our life because what we think is now clear and what we do is well aligned with it. So therefore, we experience that deeper inside harmony.
Hmm.
So I don't think that any like structured kindness program should be like, hey, let's, throw around all these random acts of kindness throughout your week. I don't think that's going to work. I think we need to start prior to that by addressing what are our deepest values? Who do we really want to be in this world? And taking the time to do that work first. And then aligning kindness becomes more natural.
Okay, that I like that. That's interesting. And just to clarify, so when you're saying identifying your values, are you saying that identifying your values will help you become kinder, or is it saying we're identifying kindness as one of our values?
No, I think no matter what value you identify, it will help you become kinder. Because you might identify that honesty is really big for you. Well, being honest is kind. Now, of course, sometimes you have to tell the hard truth.
Sure, yeah.
But you can, if you're going to do it, you can do it in a kind way, right?
Mm-hmm.
But instead of like ignoring that person that has bugged you, now if you've identified that honesty is high on your list, you might say, okay, I got to address it and I want to be constructive in how I do it because I'm trying to honor that value. And ultimately, you're kinder than if you had just ignored the person for whatever you found was irritating, right?
Yeah, it's funny. And at the risk of starting down a tangent, I don't want to go on. I've been doing a lot of research for myself on dopamine and dopamine fasting and the impact of dopamine on mood, procrastination, motivation. And I just read a book on this, and there's a whole chapter on honesty and talking about like honesty and self-awareness, and about how when you are honest about yourself, your needs, your values, I mean, they might not have said values, when you're honest about all this stuff and express it, we lie in an attempt to protect feelings and to be nicer, but it ultimately ends up working against us. And when you are more honest, it's sort of like for the mood thing, it actually makes you feel better. And it's just interesting you would mention that like literally the day after I just read this. So, like I said, that's kind of a
Well,
tangent, but
but the big values are pretty much the same for everyone, right? We all care about being people who are loving,
mm-hmm.
who are joyful, who are honest, or reliable. We want to be healthy, right? So we're all linked with one another through those same desires, and sometimes we just can't find the way, or we have other goals that kind of get in the way. But when we find ways around those other goals, or to the goal, maybe I should say, but through those values, then we feel better. So that's ultimately what that chapter was also honoring. It's the same principle.
Right. I like that. So when you work with, say, an organization on kindness, and I know you have an 8-week program you do as well. We can talk about that in a minute. When you go in then and work, you're asking the individuals to identify their own individual values, or are you
Yes.
looking at more like what's our organizational values, or both, or
Mm-mm.
neither?
Mm-mm. I feel like a lot of organizational values are like things that are put on the wall and that nobody ever reads after it's done. It's a whole
Very
big
true.
waha meeting, and we hope that we're going to be that, but it doesn't mean anything to the individual.
Yep.
What means something to the individual is, what do I believe in? What's important to me? And then how do I bring that to my workplace? How do I manifest that in my day to day actions and activities and even thought processes? So it's the individual value of each person.
Okay. So let's talk a little more about your process then. And this is kind of what you go through with your 8 week. Is it 8 week or just 8 session? I forget if it's.
It's 8 weeks, but it's very flexible. If an employer says, "Oh, I'd like a 4 week version," well, I can do that too. So it's not like it's set in stone and this is exactly how it's going to happen for everybody.
All right. So, and to much degree and as much depth you want to go in, what you're comfortable with. So early on, we identify values, and then from there, how do we build on that in terms of helping bring more kindness to our team or organization?
And there's one more thing that we need to identify other than our values in the first few steps, which
Mm-hmm.
is, what do we want to get rid of, right? We have epidemics in burnout and loneliness and anxiety and depression right now in America and throughout the world. And somehow we're all stuck with that energy. We're all a little bit contributing to it or not, right? We're either
Mm-hmm.
contributing to it or fighting it. We're either a perpetrator of it or we're a victim of it. Like we're in there. We're in the midst of all of this, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so it's important to identify, like, what energy do we want to get rid of, and then what energy do we want to bring more of into our lives. And so once we're very clear on why we want to do this kindness thing, other than it's going to be fun, because it is, you know. But if you're just doing it because it's fun, it might not get as deep. You might not get as resilient through
Mm-hmm.
it when the workload gets high and that sort of stuff. So let's identify, what do we want to get rid of, what do we want to do more of, and that's individual. And then we dig into kindness, and we start with more the random acts of kindness, so we can kind of test out our hand at, what am I good at? Am I someone who's good at complimenting? Am I someone who's good at thanking? Am I someone who's good at, like, making jokes, like you, Avish,
Mm-hmm.
to try and boost somebody else's mood? Like, what are my strengths in terms of bringing kindness to the world? We also talk about kindness to remove um, challenges for other people, right? Am I good at offering support? Am I good at recognizing someone who's going through a tough patch? And what do I do to help them, right? So we throw around a few random acts of kindness to try and test out our hand. Then we work more closely with our most significant, most meaningful work relationships. So,
Mm-hmm.
who are the handful of people that you interact with most often? And how can you monitor yourself to make sure that you bring kindness to those relationships on a day to day basis? And as we start self monitoring, we might realize, oh, look, of course I have a harder time in my relationship with Steve. I never do anything kind to him or with him or for
Mm-hmm.
him. And of course, my relationship is much better with Lisa because I shower her with all my kindness on a day to day basis, right? So
Mm-hmm.
we work on those most meaningful relationships. Then I ask people to identify a couple harder relationships, like those people that just bug you,
Yep.
how can we try and lessen that burden? How
Mm-hmm.
can we try, relational energy self replicates, right? If I send you kindness and good vibes, eventually some of that's going to come back to me. You may not like me, but eventually you're going to be like, you know what, she's been so kind. I gotta let my guard down, or I gotta give her a chance, or I gotta give her a second appraisal because my first one might be obsolete by now, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So we work on those tougher relationships, and then we draw a plan for how are we going to bring kindness more deeply into the fabric of what we do day in and day out. So if you're in HR, for example, kindness might be part of your process. Like, oh, we like to nurture a culture of kindness around here. How do you see yourself fitting in? Like
Mm-hmm.
that's a new kind of interview question that will get some people like, what? Kindness at work? Right?
Mm-hmm.
And that will get other people like, wow, I love that. Well, let me tell you, right? So, how do you bring in kindness into the fabric of what you do on the day-to-day basis? And then we, talk about like commitments for the future. What did we learn? What's our kindness strengths? What do we want to keep doing? What was difficult and that we have learned from, and those sorts of things. So that's the program.
Gotcha. All right, so it's pretty comprehensive then in terms of, and I like how you start with the lower hanging fruit, like which are your close, important work relationships before you jump to the,
Yes.
because I do something similar where I'm talking about yes and yes but and I'm like, how do you create this culture? It's like start with the low hanging fruit. Like you're gonna be tempted to want to go after that biggest, most negative person. Like wait on them. Don't start with them because you will give up right away.
And saying yes and to these people instead of yes but to these harder relationships might in itself be an act of kindness. So I need to make a note of
Well, and I
that.
love that's some of the, as I said when I was reading some of your content, that's one of the bells that went off in my head. It's a different angle to a similar approach. It's like to me, yes and is an act of kindness. Yes,
Yes.
but is that critical? I'm going to disagree. I need to prove my point. But yes and is just like an empathetic response. Even if it's that negative person, just saying yes and to them as a starting point. And what I find, and I'd be curious, and I think you've written about this, for me, the hardest thing is explain to people how to say yes and to a yes butter. How do you say yes and to someone who is negative and just pushes your buttons? And I'm sure that you have heard or found that being kind to the unkind person is hard because it triggers your emotions, it triggers your buttons. It feels unfair. So, what is your advice for that person who's like, well, I think being kind would be better for me and useful and productive, but it's so hard when this person is being so grouchy. Like, what do you have tactics for them to kind of start that road?
Well, we don't need to achieve perfection, right? Day one, right? So maybe like on a scale of like 0 to 10, right, where 0 is the meanest version of you and 10 is like the Jesus version of you, right? You tend to treat that person at a 2.
Yeah.
Maybe you can try and be a 3. How can you stretch to a 4? But
Mm-hmm.
you don't need to be the full out 8 this week, right?
Right.
So try and see how that little effort feels, and chances are you're going to feel better about yourself. Because when we're
Mm-hmm.
mean to someone, like it doesn't sit well with us. You know,
Yeah.
I'll share something with you. I got angry a couple weeks ago. I'm not good at anger. I don't get angry very often. I think in my whole life, I felt my blood boil about 6 times,
Mm-hmm.
and one of those times was 6 weeks ago. And I'm still like uncomfortable about what happened that day, even though it's been weeks now. So when we don't act in accordance with our values, it chips away at our self esteem. It chips away at our sense of harmony, at our inner peace, and it lasts. And the next time we see that person, we're still thinking about that. Oh, I
Mm-hmm.
was a jerk the other day, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes it might even be good to say, you know what, I don't think I've been like the kindest friend to you. I think I've been a bit of a jerk. I think I was under the impression that XYZ, or I was a little bit upset because once, blah, blah, blah. And it's time I get over it. Maybe you don't even tell the person face to face. Maybe you just tell them, like, maybe out loud or maybe even just in your heart, but they're not even there. You just pretend that they're there. And you
Mm-hmm.
try and give yourself a fresh start with that person. And you try and envision how would they respond if you really did that face to face for real.
Mm.
Or maybe you do it for real too if you have that courage, but it depends on your strengths, it depends on
Sure.
your values, right? But when you become that 4 or 5 towards that individual instead of the jerkish 2, you feel better about that interaction, you feel better about yourself in that relationship. It pays off in terms of who do you really want to be in this world. And if you realize I felt better being a 4 than a 2, even though I don't really like that person, well, the next time your baseline is now 4.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like it.
So
There's so many like Zen stories that are like this too about how like if you are like you're still carrying the load, like I'm like when you're mad
yes.
at someone, it weighs on you, not them, the person you got mad at, and you're hurting yourself. And what I like about your approach is it's incremental and step by step. You know, you're not saying, like you
Yes,
said, it's not about now you have to be kind all the time to perfection. It's just let's try little things. Let's experiment. Let's see how it works. Let's
right.
see how it feels. And then you come back and I guess that's probably part of the program too. It's you go try it, and then when you get back together the next time, you talk about what did you try, how did it work, what did you learn, what can we do next time.
Yeah, and sometimes we're gonna mess up, and we have to accept that, right? It's just like I'm learning to jog. I'm not a great jogger. I go for power walks, and I insert intervals of jogging, right? Well, some days I'm out of breath and I can't explain it, and I'll be jogging for like a minute, and I'm like, this is not for me.
Mm-hmm.
Other days I'll be jogging for like 8 minutes, and I'll be like, what? How am I still like? How has my watch not told me to slow down yet? I have cardio today and I can't explain it, right? It'll be the same thing. We will have like kindness days where we're like that hero that like, oh, I'm so Jesus-like, right?
Well,
And then there will be this day.
so let's talk about that then, because the one thing we haven't yet talked about, and I'm not sure how much you go into this in your programs, is being kind to yourself, right? Because like a lot
Yes,
of it is you are gonna fail, and if you're like many perfectionists, a lot like me, when you mess up, you really beat
yes,
yourself up, like I suck,
yes,
and then you give up. So
yes.
is being kind to yourself woven into your kind of work and routine as well?
Yeah, and I have to say, I'm not as good at it as I would like to be, but I'm working on it, right? We're all works in progress. And when I first heard of self-compassion, I thought like, oh, that's for sissies. You know, like you should like whip yourself in shape
Yeah,
instead.
uh-huh.
But what research shows is that when you try to whip yourself in shape, you are more likely to cause the opposite effect than what you are looking for. And when I was doing the sleep, food, mood, and exercise program, I was trying to work with the underlying biochemical activity of the body. So let me backtrack to that time a little bit before I jump back to the self compassion
Mm-hmm.
and self kindness thing. But I would tell people like, if you are sleep deprived, it is very hard to control your food cravings because a sleep deprived body will produce excess cortisol, and cortisol produces high sugar, high fat, high salt food cravings.
Mm-hmm.
When you are sleep deprived, you are low on serotonin. Serotonin is liquid self control. So now you have higher cravings and lower ability to control them. You're going to fail. So work on sleep before you want to work on your food cravings, right? So I was trying to use the underlying biochemical activity to get to the goal.
Mm-hmm.
So when I first heard of self compassion, I was thinking, well, I'm still arguing with myself in my head, right? And arguing with myself in my head doesn't work very well.
Yeah.
If I feel like I'm trying to coerce my thought process into a pattern that they don't want to go, that my thoughts don't want to go into, right? But then somebody told me, but MJ, use the biochemical activity. And I was like, what do you mean? And she said, like, what do you do physically when you want to comfort yourself? And I was like, oh, here we go, the self hug thing. I said, I'm not big on self hugs. And she said, no, it doesn't have to be a self hug, but do you like put a hand at the back of your neck sometimes? And I'm like, no, I don't think I do. And then she was like, do you rub your arm? And I was like, yeah, I might do that. And as we were talking, I realized that when I want to comfort myself, I rock back and forth and I touch my thighs and my hands move up and down my thighs as I rock.
Mm-hmm.
And that feels very comforting to me. And that gesture is, well, feels comforting and is comforting because it helps my body produce oxytocin, and oxytocin helps with kindness. It's produced from
Right.
kindness. And when we produce oxytocin, we're more likely to be kind. So if the self kindness thing of like, I should talk to myself like I'm my best friend
Mm-hmm.
doesn't work for you when you keep it at the mental level, because a lot of us think that's where it ends, that's
Yeah.
where it starts and ends. And it didn't work for me because I'm very good when I talk to my best friend, but when I talk to myself, I'm not my best friend. And wow, it's hard to be happy when like you're blasting in your head like messages from your worst enemy, right? If my friends talks to me the way I talk to myself, most times I would say I don't need friends like that. But if I can start producing that oxytocin with my comforting gesture, then my thoughts are more bendable. Then my thoughts start to feel kinder. So yes, self-kind. To answer your question, yes,
Got
and
it.
it fits in.
Yes, and it's important, and I agree. I think for most people, it's harder, I think, to be kind to ourselves because I think a lot of us have that message, especially if you grew up in the U.S., which is very like you know, discipline and achieve, and you got to crack the whip,
Yes.
and that doesn't work for me either. And I find that yeah, kindness, whether it's external or internal, but it is hard to to implement internally.
We have that pride that we want to be tough, right?
Yeah.
But really, it's being soft that's tough in this culture.
Well, I think yeah, I agree because being tough is almost like putting up a shell. So
Yes.
like the vulnerability is the tough thing. Being kind, being vulnerable, not lashing out, not defending yourself like that. That takes strength and discipline, I think.
Yeah, I think if you're currently like in the Middle East fighting a war or in Ukraine, right? Then you need to be tough and maybe like there you have no time for self-kindness, right?
Yeah.
But if your battle is the day-to-day grind of going to work and coming home and going to soccer practice and feeding the kids and putting them to bed and starting over the next day, kindness really fits in.
Yeah, I I absolutely agree. I want to touch upon a couple things that still relate to kindness thing, but maybe transition and touch upon a couple things you had said. So number one, you mentioned relational energy. You kind of just dropped that word,
Yeah.
um, and I like that. And I read something you wrote about it, but could you explain what exactly you mean by relational energy and how that kind of applies?
Yes, so yes, and and thank you for asking. So, relational energy is the energy that I put into our relationship is the energy that you receive. And as you receive that quality of energy, because of our mirror neurons in the
Mm-hmm.
brain, you are kind of, your brain is adjusting to the frequency I'm pushing out towards you. And so you are reflecting it back to me. So if I send you uh, funny, kind, loving vibes, then you are more likely to feel the same towards me and to send me back that same energy. Now, not 100% because
Sure.
you are your own person. You have your own thoughts, your own feelings, maybe your own resentments.
Mm-hmm.
um, but eventually, I will make a dent. I will make progress, right? Same thing. If I decide that I don't like you and I always treat you like I don't like you, disrespect, avoidance, that sort of stuff, then eventually it usually doesn't take too long in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
You'll catch the hint and treat me similarly.
And it sounds so obvious, but it seems something we all forget. And you had cited someone from Kim Cameron and Emma Sapala, I think, did some research
Sipala,
about
yeah,
relational
Emma,
energy, and you
yes.
wrote that, or they said that it's the best predictor of successful leadership is actually beyond charisma or innovation or personal power. That relation, they found that relational energy is the like number one predictor of leadership success.
So what they really, the way they've coined it is, are you a positive energizer? And
Mm-hmm.
the answer to that is as simple as when you are in my presence, is your energy, your positive energy, not your anger,
Yeah.
is your positive energy uplifted and heightened? If the answer is yes, so after we part, you feel better than before you were in my presence. If the answer to that is yes, then I am a positive energizer to you. And yes, the more positive energizers there are in an organization, the more likely this organization is to be a success. In fact, high level organizations, like the ones that tend to outperform their competitors by large factors, tends to have 3 times more positive energizers than the competition. And if you are a positive energizer, it is a 4 times better predictor of your success within your organization than if you are not a positive energizer.
And your approach is if we want to be positive energizers is to start with kindness.
That's right.
The easiest, the simplest way to be a positive energizer is to be kind.
Yes, I think so. Because if I am kind to you, then you're more likely to be uplifted than anything else, right?
Uh, and so along with positive inducer or with positive energizer, I went on your website and you describe yourself as a positivity inducer, which I loved as a title. But I just want to ask you about that. Like, what do you mean by that? How did you come up with it? Because it's a cool little phrase. And having known you and seen you speak and chatted with you, like you are, I mean, you're the giant smile on your face right now. Like you are very like passing positivity. But where did you get this idea of being a positivity inducer?
Well, you're doing a marketing session with your new website designer, and they're like, "What are we going to put up there?" And I'm trying to, like, they say, how do people describe you? And like people often say, oh, you're so positive, and I feel more positive when I'm around you. And I knew of that concept of positive energizers. And
Mm-hmm.
um, so I said, like, I'd love to say something along those lines. And somehow we came up with that term. Now I am moving away from that term.
Sure.
uh, it's time for a new website. It's time for a redesign, right? So that what you are seeing right now, which is still up, and I don't have an exact plan for when to redesign, although it's starting to pop up in my head. But I want to go more towards kindness and
Sure.
not so much the wellness aspect that I used to be in. Now, positivity inducer could still fit, but I started to play with kindness strategist. I think
Uh-huh.
that might be a better keyword.
No, there's yeah,
Or
marketing, SEO. It's
that's exactly right. So I mean, you
so
do what you can, you test
you'll
things
still
out.
be a positivity inducer. You just may not
Hopefully,
brand on it. Is the
hopefully, we'll see. I don't know where I'll end up with
well,
that.
I just like that phrase, and it goes with kindness. And I want to ask you about one other thing. Um, is you had said, I think on one of your LinkedIn posts, that there's all these different goals we have, all these different things we're trying to achieve, but if you just pursue kindness first and foremost, everything else falls into place. So could you just talk a little bit about kind of that perspective you have?
Yes. So, when we're at work, right, we want to perform well. We want to be innovative, and we want to offer good service quality, and we want to be collaborative, and we want to be a good leader, and all of those things, right? Well, if you're kind first, you will serve your people well. You will lead your people well. People will feel safe around you. And so, therefore, they will be able to express an idea that might seem a little bit out of the box. And as a result of that, it will help them be more innovative, and it will help you hear those ideas and work with them. It helps with collaboration. It helps with so many things. You want to be healthy? Well, kindness, I've been reading about this and I'm flabbergasted. Kindness explains medical phenomenon, like biological responses that modern medicine cannot explain. So they did this study on bunnies, and they were feeding the bunnies a high cholesterol diet, and they were trying to see how is that going to impact them with all like cardiovascular disease and all kinds of other things. And then they realized this bunch of bunnies does not respond to the high cholesterol diet. Their cholesterol levels are not going up. That's a failure. What's going on? Isn't that funny, right? They're
That's the
supposed to have
failure.
high cholesterol. They don't. Yeah. What's wrong? And they started to observe that the bunny handler of that specific group of bunnies wouldn't just grab them and bring them to their meal. She would pet them and give them a little kiss and give them tender love and care on the way to eating, after eating, throughout the day. And therefore, because they felt loved, their cholesterol levels didn't go up. So
Wow.
this is one example, but I'm reading a book, and it's like it's written by a doctor, and it's full of examples like that. And I'm like, right? So, all those outcomes that we're after with healthy sleep, food, mood, and exercise, we can achieve a lot of those through kindness.
Just by
So
being
it's
kind.
just, it's like, it's endless. It's like a reservoir, and people are going to say, wow, isn't she kindness happy? Yes. And you should be too.
Yeah. And in a lot of ways, that's the ultimate goal, is like just to be happy, right? Is like all these things we're pursuing almost kind of come down to just being happy, which we have the power of being happier in the moment by shifting our approach, by being kinder. That's fascinating. I like that. I'll have to look, to share with me what that book is, because I'm curious now to read that as well.
It's called the
Um,
rabbit effect.
there you go. it's
There you have it.
well, it's funny, kind of tying back to what you said before. Like, and I'm not a biochemist or doctor, but my understanding is there's a lot of illness and health issues related to elevated cortisol levels and how it impacts. And just the act of being
Yes.
kind or having someone be kind to you lowers your cortisol. So it would make a
Yes.
certain amount of sense then that, oh, yeah, I guess, God, this thing that sounds so fluffy and soft is actually so hard and powerful and impactful. And just people,
And hardwired. Yes,
yes,
absolutely.
yeah,
Yes.
Um, Fantastic. All right, so let's just say if everyone listening feels like I do, which is yes, love it, kindness, absolutely. So where or how should they get started if they want to be kinder or bring more kindness into their lives?
I think they should follow me on LinkedIn because I
Yes,
explain it all every Monday or Friday.
this is very true, and we're gonna link to your LinkedIn. And you do, and like I said, I invited you on here because I was following your LinkedIn stuff. So we will share the link in the show notes and on the webpage to follow you on LinkedIn.
Start where it feels best. Start where it feels natural, right? And maybe for you, it might be I'll start with strangers because that's people I will never see ever again, probably. So if I mess up, it won't be too visible, right?
Yeah.
Um, and if even that feels too threatening, right? I posted on LinkedIn, like, yes, starting a practice of kindness can be awkward. I'll agree. But you know what's worse than the awkwardness of starting a practice of kindness? The misery of indifference.
Mm.
And we live in a world where people are all on their phones and they don't pay attention to anyone else ever again. And I think that as this habit becomes more and more widespread and entrenched in our lifestyles, and like you and I, we grew up at a time where people were not like that,
Yeah.
right? Like, do you
Mm-hmm.
remember there was a time where if people took out their phones to start to scroll, we thought that they were trying to look important? Do you
Yeah.
remember that time?
Mm-hmm.
But now everybody does that all the time. So as we become more and more entrenched in this habit of being on our screens and ignoring one another, we're turning towards a world of indifference. And that is not the world I want to live in.
Wow,
So
that is a powerful message. Yeah, overcome the awkwardness. Start with the low hanging fruit, low consequence fruit, like people you don't even know. So there's no consequence. That is great. All right, I want to ask you. We're gonna finish up here. We're kind of coming to the end of our time. Two things. One quick question at the end, and one before then, which may not have anything to do with kindness, but it's about you, and I want to talk about this or ask you about it. So we've known each other for a long time, and when we first met, it was through the Speakers Association. You were kind of just getting started in your speaking career, and you've now started weaving in these elements, and we talked about this a little bit back then. And I'm watching your videos and stuff, and your site, and you're up there singing and dancing in your programs, which is unique for speakers, right? Speakers a lot of times stand straight, you got to be professional, and again the positivity, the positive energizer, and I just want to because I think authenticity is so important. You talk about identifying your values. I think being true to yourself makes it easier to be kind because you're not like pretending anything. So just and I don't know if how relevant this is or it's something you're interested in chatting about, but I'm just curious, like, what's your thought process around doing something that's so different from what maybe a normal speaker would do, and how you kind of came to that decision? Yeah, you know what? I'm gonna dance on stage and I'm gonna sing on stage and bring all of that to my audience.
and by the way, I'm not a good singer. So when I sing on
That
stage, it's
makes it
not
even
to
better.
impress. Yes, exactly. It's not to impress, it's to make people laugh. um, you know, one of the things that speakers always say is they will forget what you've said, but they will never forget how you made them feel. And I feel like the best way to make them feel good is by being true. If you're on stage and you are putting up a facade because you have to look professional, right? They're not going to bond with you. They're not going to feel elevated by what you have to say. But if you dare to be you right up on stage for everyone to see,
Mm-hmm.
then you're like giving them permission to be a little bit more of who they are. And I feel like the workplace has tried to strip away the essence of people, right? Like back in the day, everybody had to wear suits to go to work, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or everybody who had like, anything of a like white collar job ish. And now we're starting to accept more diversity, more different styles, more of the real person at work. And to the extent that work wants to or needs to immerse itself into the person's real life, I believe that the person needs to be able to be real and
Mm-hmm.
immerse that into what they bring to work. So it's a way to just try to open up that energy And it's also how I feel I can best serve the people that are in the room by by being by stripping myself of all of the facade that I might want to have otherwise.
That's great. It clearly works because the audience loves it when you do that sort of thing too. It does connect, and I do agree. I think I do agree that like there's a lot of facade right there, a lot of like put up a professional face and not reveal. And just
Which
by
is not your thing either, by the way.
well, it's funny. It's not my thing. I get on stage and I do all sorts of wild stuff. But
Yes.
but it's a lesson I have to remind myself off stage. And to your point about inspiring people, and a quick anecdote of my own is, I have a very nerdy background. Comic books, fantasy novels, role playing games, all this stuff. And when I grew up in the '80s, none of this stuff was socially acceptable. You kind of hit it. Now it's like, oh, all these, Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, all this stuff is everyone. I'm like, wait, this is not fair. So, but when I would go to like networking, before or after a keynote, I would always try to be very professional. It was always so boring, and
Yes.
and I find whenever I reveal any of that stuff that feels vulnerable or authentic,
Yes.
it so often leads to like such a better relationship, such a better conversation, and
Yes.
it's just like people, like you said, I think the world is craving authenticity, and I think the way you can best serve your organization, your family, and the world is to just bring that authenticness out.
I agree. Yes,
That's
and to that.
yes, Ed. I appreciate you doing that so much. All right. All right. One final question, which I end all the episodes with this question. It's a very simple one, and in this case, it probably doesn't need to be asked, but I will say it. So, my honest to God belief is the world would be a better place if everyone started with a default yes and versus yes but mindset. So for you, I think we know the answer, but for you, what is like a small thing that you think if everyone in the world did, it would make the world a better place?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, I'll say this. I'll say this. The first thing in this day and age where we're at nowadays, right? Going to offer somebody help might feel too awkward. We're too far gone for that. The first thing, the simplest thing, is to look up from your phone and look somebody else in the eye and wait. That's not where it ends, because most people will say, yeah, yeah, we hear that all the time. But then when you look at them in the eyes, what are your eyes saying? Are they saying, are you done so I can get back to my phone? Or are they saying, like, I try to, and I forget often too, but I try to make my mental text be something like, I love you, or you're my friend, or you matter. What you have to say is important to me. I try to, and I don't repeat it over and over because I'm trying to listen,
Sure, yeah.
but I try to express that through my eyes in order for that relationship to blossom. So I think that's the simplest thing that people have to say yes and to today.
That is great. So simplest thing would be to be kind, and one of the ways to do that, look up from your phone, make eye contact, and really think, what's that positive message? Connecting with them, loving them, understanding them. Love it. That is fantastic.
Spread out that kindness. Yes.
All right. Well, this is fantastic. Let's share how people can learn more about you and connect with you. We already said the LinkedIn, which is MJ Shaar with two A's, SHAAR.
Yes.
We'll link
Thank
to
you.
that here, but if you're listening to this, you're not MJ Shaar. And when you're on social media sites, is it MJ or is it M.J.
It's just MJ. Yep.
Okay, MJ Shaar. We'll link to that. Any other places? Your book, website, anything else to send people to?
Yeah, if you plug in MJ Shaar on Google, you'll find all of those things, but none of it really matters right now. What matters,
All right. Well, then the
what
best thing to
matters is
do is go to MJ's LinkedIn,
that's
follow her
right.
there. She posts regularly. A lot of great stuff. Every post makes me think. It gives just a little nugget to think about how to be kinder, and not only how to be kinder, but why it's important. So it's not just like, yeah, yeah, I know I got to be nice. But it's like, oh yeah, if I do that, I'll lead better, I'll connect better, I'll serve better. It's all great stuff. Well, MJ, thank you so much. This was awesome conversation. I learned so much. I'm gonna use the looking in the eye and thinking. Because just like you said, I will make I know to make eye contact and put my phone down, but I am in that place like, all right, let's see what this person wants, as opposed to let me, like, how can I help you? I love you, whatever. I'm gonna do that. So thank you.
And the most important place to start is with your kids, because
I
we
was
do
gonna
look at
add
our
that.
kids. Yes, yes. Let's create a better world for our kids. So thank you for having me, Avish. This was very very fun for me to get a chance to spread my message. I appreciate you for giving me that chance.
Absolutely. Thank you.